Hey everybody, this is Gabe Hernandez with Comical Opinions. The topic for today I wanted to go over is Scott Snyder and his just announced Kickstarter campaign for his new project and what that means, not necessarily from the project itself, but for the broader implications of the creator talent pool that is existing within Marvel and DC. So as you can see from the screen, from the Games Radar article, at least the tab that used to be Newsarama, Scott Snyder announced that he was basically stepping away from the day-to-day grind of just pumping out monthly comics over at DC. Scott Snyder is an A-list creator. I think that's fair to say from anybody's perspective. But it was a little bit of an odd statement for when you say you're moving away from something, but not at the same time saying what you're moving towards. That just seems a little weird and invites speculation. Not great, but fully understandable given where we are with the comic industry right now. For future generations who might see this video and you're wondering, well, what does he mean by that? That means DC in particular. They had a fairly substantial layoff last Monday, which was August 10th. Laid off about a third of their comics producing staff, mostly focused on editorial. The comics industry is kind of in a rough spot right now for three reasons, specifically for DC. Number one, they've been DC, who's owned by Warner Media, was purchased by AT&T about 18 months or so ago. So we knew layoffs were coming. We knew that AT&T was going to be hyper focused on profitability, and DC Comics is not hyper profitable. So that was one issue. Second, we are still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. And so that kind of put a very, very big, cold, wet blanket on every industry, including comics, that created some slowdowns, created some work stoppages. And that when you're in an industry that's not super profitable, at least the way it's running right now, that's definitely going to put people whose career is dependent upon things like conventions and moving from publisher to publisher and all kinds of new investments going on. That's going to be a tough spot. Thirdly, I think it would be fair to say that the quality of storytelling in the big two, at least Marvel and DC, is not what it used to be. And so that's created a bit of a downturn in interest. They've been able to maintain revenue numbers, but that's a mixed message. When you look at the way they've done that is by basically jacking up the cover price on a per issue basis. So they're selling less books, but each book is more expensive. So the number is, when it comes to annual revenue, if you look at the latest Comic-Con numbers for 2019, they're about even. They dropped a few million, but about even. But that's a bit of a misnomer when you consider that on a per issue basis, it's more expensive. So what that really means is you have fewer people buying books, but they're willing to pay more money. Not the picture you want to paint. So the reason I think this is important to bring up is because Scott Snyder making the announcement that he was stepping away from DC Comics seemed odd when comics publishers need all the help they can get, especially when you have A-list talent like Scott Snyder. And so now we have seen today what was announced is his Kickstarter campaign for his new book, Nocturnal, that he's putting together with Tony Daniel. It's not a comic book per se. It's more like a illustrated novel. If you go through and go to his Kickstarter campaign, you see some of these pages here, and you also have the trailer. But this is a better representation. The picture that you have in front of you is a better representation of what's going on. It's basically a book that sort of looks like a very polished script with illustrated pages that goes along with it. So it's kind of a hybrid between an actual book and a comic book. Nothing wrong with that at all, but it's definitely a different kind of thing that you expect than a comic book that you pick off the shelf at a local comic store. So congratulations to Scott Snyder, because if you look at this campaign, as you can see the numbers, fully funded and then some, and it's only been about 6 hours. So great on Scott Snyder. This is good news for him. This shows that people are interested in the type of work he does. It shows that an indie project can be very popular and also very successful in a very short period of time. And so that's great. What this also shows is this is a second A-list creator in as many months that has done something similar. The other example I'm going to point to is Mr. Sean Gordon Murphy with his Plot Holes project. Sean Gordon Murphy also had a very sort of vague, innocuous kind of announcement that he was shutting down his Twitter account. He was stepping away from just sort of the more day-to-day interactions, just focusing on his big indie project here, which is Plot Holes, which is a wholly new creative endeavor, and that his Twitter account was being shut down in favor of a secondary account that just focused on art and promotion. Now, I'll tell you right off the bat, I think every creator should do something like that. I see way too many creators that have Twitter accounts and other kinds of accounts where they're talking about their work, but they're also talking about everything else under the sun, be it politics, world events, what's going on in their neighborhood, all the things that might be interesting to them, might be interesting to their personal circle of family and friends and people who are in their lives on a daily basis. But when it comes to folks that are following them for the work that they do, the projects that they're working on, the craft and everything that goes along with it, there's a lot of noise you got to sort through. So I think from my perspective, Sean Gordon Murphy had the absolute A plus 100% right idea. Is you have you have social media accounts that focus on nothing but promoting your work. I think every creator did that. The news cycle for understanding what people are working on within the comic industry would be a much better place. So his backing away was a little vague, and then he comes out with this project. This project also got funded very, very quickly. So what you're seeing here is you have Sean Gordon Murphy, you also have Scott Snyder, and by all accounts, as far as their public presentation, how they present themselves to the customers and the fans in a public setting, super nice guys. I have not heard anybody say a bad word about them. I've never seen them say a mean word toward anyone in any capacity that I've been able to find. Not that I was looking too hard, but just in general, super nice guys, very talented guys, very creative guys, and both of them within a matter of months have chosen to, in a very public way, say, I am stepping back from the monthly meat grinder of doing comics to focus on my big indie project stuff. And in both those cases, their indie projects, as soon as they were announced, were pretty much funded and then some, like that, pretty quickly. That's encouraging for the A-list creators that want to follow suit. So that begs a couple of follow-up questions. Number one, who's going to be the next A-list creator that's going to be on that list that's going to move over to do their indie project? And it's not just a question of doing indie projects, because there are a lot of creators that work for the big two like Marvel and DC, and they have their own indie projects. But this is intentional. There's a difference of intent. These creators are shifting their focus, that they're not saying, well, I work for the big two, I do work for Marvel and DC, I write, I draw, I do whatever I do, and I have these indie projects on the side. This looks more like I'm shifting my focus towards the indie project being my main focus, and then I do some stuff with Marvel and DC on the side. I think it's a little bit of a shift. It's a bit of a nuance, but it makes a big difference, I think, because that plays into the mentality and the mindset of these A-list creators. And so if that truly is the case, and that's going to be more of the long-term play, does that somewhat indicate that there's going to be an exodus of sorts for A-list creators away from those big publishers? Now, we know from DC having their layoffs a week ago today, as it stands right now, that they're definitely trimming down their title list. They're definitely slimming down on the number of books they put on a monthly basis. I'd be willing to bet you some amount of cash, or at least whatever cash I've got in my pocket, that Marvel is not going to be far behind. And so the question is, if there are going to be fewer titles, fewer books, fewer kind of traditional floppies that are produced on a monthly basis, that means this probably means there's going to be fewer creative jobs for those floppies, or at least to be at a premium. And so you're going to have a lot more creators that are not going to be doing monthly comic books for the big two in the foreseeable future. And if that's the case, is that going to push those, maybe not A-list, but some A-list, maybe some B-list or C-list creators to kind of refocus themselves over on the indie projects? And how successful are they going to be doing that if they are not top tier creators? That's an open question. I don't know. I think some will do well because they'll have that creativity to sort of flourish and broaden their creative scope and the type of things they want to create outside of the editorial mandates of Marvel and DC. Others, maybe not so much. We'll find out. But this also doesn't bode well, I think, in the long run for Marvel and DC, because what that means is their top tier creators are just not going to be doing work for them. It's like, why would you want to? I mean, if you come over here and I'm looking at this Kickstarter right now, you're 24 grand over goal within a matter of hours. How does Marvel or DC compete with that level of success when it comes to bringing a creator on? You get the prestige of the publisher's name. You get the prestige of working on maybe a Batman or Superman or Justice League. But again, that's just sort of prestige. You can't you can't feed your family with prestige. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes going forward. I'm curious to see if this starts into a trend. And that's why I wanted to talk about this. Not so much Scott Snyder's success with this Kickstarter. Congratulations to him again. But it's the fact that I'm starting to see more creators kind of go this route as their central focus instead of just as a side project. It'd be interesting to see if this picks up going further. So that's what I wanted to bring up today. Keep your eyes peeled. Let me know what you think. Do you see any other creators going this route, making indie projects their main focus? Or is it just still sort of relegated to a side gig? Let me know what you think in the comment section. Please hit like and subscribe. And don't forget to sign up for my newsletter. Every week, I'm going to be putting out a longer, more in-depth article about whatever topic seems to kind of be the most interesting or the most important to what's going on in the comic industry on a weekly basis. So thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. And this is Gabe Hernandez for Comical Opinions.